What's going on, guys, and welcome to another episode of Smash JT. Sega has given us the finalized list of the Sega Genesis mini games, and judging from the picture at the bottom, you can see it says includes 40 legendary games. Actually, it's been increased to 42. Sega gave 2 bonus games in this announcement, and they're at the top of the screen there, Tetris and Darius, which I will talk about in far greater detail. In this video, I'm going to go through all of these briefly to give you some thoughts on what I think about these games and overall feeling of the Sega Genesis Mini, and we're going to talk about some glaring omissions and why they might be absent from this thing. JT. Kicking this list off, we're going to start with Strider, which is up there with my favorite games of all time. It's definitely very high on the list of Sega Genesis games out there, and I feel like it's one of those games that a lot of people these days have missed out on, so it's exciting to see this get kind of a second chance at life with people that may not have grown up with the Sega Genesis and able to play Strider, which is a classic 2D side-scrolling platformer. It really excelled in the arcade, but the Genesis port really did it some justice. This thing is hours and hours of fun. It really takes you away when you play this game. It has a very unique aura to it. So Strider is one of those games I'm truly looking forward to. Next up, we're going to Kid Chameleon, and this game in particular I played the absolute hell out of when I was a kid. I never actually owned the game. It was one of those that I rented it so many times I could have bought it 3 times over, but because of how life was back then, we just rented games over and over and over again. This was one of those games, very similar to like a combination of Sonic the Hedgehog mixed with Mario Brothers, but with a unique aspect of being able to unlock different costumes that give you different abilities. Like here you see him climbing a wall. There's a ton of different costumes you can get in it. Not a fantastic game by any means, but fun. A very fun game, one that's definitely worth playing, and something that I'm excited to replay once again. So yes, Kid Chameleon has been confirmed coming to the system, and it's one I'm very excited about. Moving on to a game that many might think should not be on this list is Virtua Fighter 2, and a lot of people wonder why this was even called Virtua Fighter when it's just a 2D fighter. There's nothing 3D or Virtua about this, but the game itself isn't a terrible game. It's just not as good as the arcade Virtua Fighter that we were all accustomed to. So I think when people start comparing the Virtua Fighter arcade to this game, of course this pales in comparison, but on its own, it's a fun enough brawler. It's a fun enough fighter game. It's one of those that, yeah, you can have some fun matches with your buddy on this, and tossing it on the Sega Genesis Mini would give people that opportunity. So, not necessarily a game that I was clamoring for, but at the same time, I mean, it's Virtua Fighter 2. Play it, have some fun, have some beers with your buddies, play this game, great. Next up, we have Columns, which is basically available on every compilation that Sega has ever made, and it's a good game, it's fun. It reminds me a lot of their answer to Tetris. As opposed to matching blocks in locations, you're matching 3 colors together to eliminate them. So, very fun puzzle game, one that a lot of old school gamers have already played the hell out of, but still holds up today, especially in the arcade multiplayer arena. It's one of those that you can certainly have a lot of hours of fun with, and one that I was fully expecting to be on the compilation. I'm surprised they waited until the 4th wave to tell us about this one, but hey, Columns is going to be a part of the Sega Genesis Mini. It's Columns, it's a fun game, so most people will be happy about this one. Next up, we have Eternal Champions, which is another 2D fighter going alongside Virtua Fighter and Street Fighter 2 that are going to be in this collection. It's good, it's a fun game, it's a good diversion for people that are looking for a entertaining experience with a buddy, not one that I'd necessarily want people to be playing single player version. Like most of these old school fighter games, they excel in multiplayer, so yeah, it's a fun addition. Nothing that I was personally clamoring for, but I'm sure some people will be happy with this one, and it's a good enough game to be on the Sega Genesis Mini. Here's one that really surprised me, Light Crusader. Not one that I'm very familiar with. I had heard about this title a long time ago, but didn't really play very much of it. It looks basically like a Shadowrun type style of the 3/4 view top down, and it's more of a RPG where you can equip weapons and go around fighting people in a 3D like environment. Something that I'm excited is included on the Sega Genesis Mini because like I said, didn't play this game very much, and this is going to give me the opportunity to do that on an actual TV with a Sega Genesis controller. So a good addition. Looks like it has some Legend of Zelda puzzle mechanics, and these graphics, especially on the dragon, are spectacular for back in the day. This is crazy good stuff. Next up, we have Monster World 4, and this is a very interesting selection for the Sega Genesis Mini because this game never came out in the US. According to Monster World 4 Wikipedia, the release for this game was April 1st, 1994 in Japan. Never ever came out in the United States. So one of those titles that a lot of people never got to experience the first time around, and a very exciting inclusion for people who enjoyed the Monster World series. I was personally surprised to see this in there. It was one of those games that I didn't think Sega would even bother touching because it was never properly translated officially, and people weren't really necessarily asking for this one to be included. So it's great that Sega went the extra mile to translate some of these games that people weren't even expecting to be a part of the compilation and include them in it. This is pretty awesome for those of us who wanted to have a shot at this game in an official release. Next up, we have Dynamite Headdy, which kind of reminds me a lot of Bonk's Adventure. I rented this game once back in the day, played it for a little bit, enjoyed my time with it, but never got very far with it. So another one of those games that I am truly looking forward to playing officially. It's made by Treasure, which was the same people that made Gunstar Heroes, and a lot of people are familiar with that recently as being one of those formerly uncovered hidden gems from the Sega Genesis library. A great 2D side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. Dynamite Headdy looks like it's a similar type style, but instead of having the guns, you kind of just throw your head at everything to destroy it, kind of like I said, Bonk's Adventure style. Looks like it's a lot of fun and one that I'm looking forward to getting back into. The graphics, the colors, everything about this game is awesome. And here we have Alesia Dragoon, which I was not very familiar with whatsoever. Doing a little bit of research on this game before loading up the video. This is a 2D side-scroller where you can unlock animal pets to join you on your journey, and you can switch through them on the fly to help you destroy these monsters. And honestly, the game looks spectacular. I'm not really sure how the controls are on it. Like I said, I have not played this game, so one of those that I'm truly looking forward to check out more. But from the looks of it on the surface, I am surprised nobody really ever talked about this game. It's one of those that looks like it deserves to be a part of every Sega Genesis library. Don't know too much about it. Looking forward to playing more of Alesia Dragoon. Next up, we have Road Rash 2, which made significant improvements over its predecessor, Road Rash. The series was one of the originators in the vehicular combat series. A lot of people absolutely love these games, and I remember back in the day, there were a lot of pissed off parents watching their kids play a motorcycle game where you beat the hell out of your competitors as you drove past them. So one of those games a lot of people will be excited about, and I'm looking forward to getting back into playing Road Rash with Road Rash 2. And here we have some footage of Darius. Most people are used to hearing Darius 2 because that's what was on the Genesis. That was the one that most people played. But no, this Sega Genesis mini collection is apparently going to have a port of Darius, which I had trouble finding footage of because it doesn't look like it was ever originally ported to the Sega Genesis back in the day. It looks absolutely fantastic from the arcade long play. As far as the Darius wiki is concerned, it says Darius is the first game in the Darius series and the second in the series canon. It was the first game by Taito to use triple screen setup, which utilized 3 monitors with the center monitor facing and the outer 2 pointing up, and mirror to make the 3 screens appear seamlessly connected. all ports of this game had to account for a single screen as a result. This is Darius. It was released on the arcade in Japan 1986, North America 1987, but as far as the platforms it was available on, it was never ported to the Genesis. We got the arcade, PC Engine CD, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance. No Genesis port. So this, in a way, kind of feels like Sega's answer to Star Fox 2 on the Super Nintendo Mini. Not necessarily a one-for-one comparison, but you could definitely see where a lot of people are thinking this game was a very surprising inclusion in the list of Sega Genesis mini games. And honestly, it looks fantastic. Looking forward to see how they port this to the Sega Genesis, if they had a unofficial ROM that never released or anything like that, or how they're going to go about this. But you can see branching paths, incredible graphics. The game, it's something that I'm definitely going to be firing up. Most likely the first game that I play when I load up the Sega Genesis Mini. And finally we have Tetris. Everyone remembers Tetris, the classic NES Game Boy game. Due to legal issues and Nintendo's exclusive rights to Tetris on video game consoles, the Sega Genesis never saw a Tetris game released. The unlicensed version was recently confirmed to exist by none other than the Tetris creator. Racketboy estimates around 10 copies of Tetris for Sega Genesis exist today. This is one of those games, when I heard Tetris was on the Sega Genesis Mini, I thought it was a misprint because I never even knew a Tetris game was available on the Genesis platform. But here is the ROM of Tetris on the Sega Genesis in action. Something I never thought I was going to see, so again, one of those games that completely surprised the hell out of a lot of people being included in the Sega Genesis Mini collection. I will be trying this one out to see what it feels like, things like that, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's Tetris. There are a million variants of it, so just the fact that it's been included in the Sega Genesis Classic Mini is awesome, but it's not necessarily one of those games that I was clamoring for and can't wait to play. But still, just the fact that they included it in the list of games, very cool. Now I want to move on to some of the titles that are not included on the Sega Genesis Classic that I kind of was expecting to be there, and it's shocking that they're not, especially when you consider some of the games that they did include in this list. It makes you wonder, what were they thinking? Was it just a licensing issue? Was it a money thing? Was it they thought the fans wanted one game over another? There are some serious missing titles from the Sega Genesis Classic. So the first one a lot of people are going to be wondering, why is this not on there, is Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. This is probably the biggest missing game, and a lot of people may not want to be buying the entire collection because it feels incomplete. It would be like Nintendo releasing a NES Classic without Mario 1, 2, and 3 on it, just including Sonic 1 and 2. It feels like there's a gaping hole in the library. What some people think the reason for the missing Sonic 3 and Knuckles is because of Michael Jackson, because of music licensing issues, things like that. Possibly. It just seems like there is something going on with this title that Sega could not include it for that reason, and it's kind of a letdown, not gonna lie. It does make the Sega Genesis Mini feel quite a bit incomplete. Not saying that a lot of the games don't make the purchase worthwhile, it's just for the collector, for the retro game enthusiast, it kinda sucks that this game is not included. Next up we have Rocket Knight Adventures, which was one of my favorite Sega Genesis games ever made, and nowhere to be found on the Sega Genesis Mini. One of those games that when you were growing up, you either played the hell out of this or you completely missed out on it, but either way, it would have been great for people to be able to experience the adventure officially through the Mini once again. Unfortunately, not included. It is a Konami title, and the next couple of games I'm going to talk about do share that Konami theme, and that is one of those concerning situations that they just missed out on a couple must-have Konami games from the Sega Genesis library. Not the end of the world because there's so many great games on the Sega Genesis Mini, but it would have been fantastic to see this game on there. It kind of reminds me of a different take on the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Similar color palette, similar controls on the 2D, but more complex enemies and more variety on how to defeat them. And yes, Rocket Knight Adventures, a classic game that is missing from a classic console. And here we have yet another Konami game that a lot of people were clamoring for. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist, unfortunately, is not a part of the Sega Genesis Classic Mini. This is one of those that I fully expected to be announced in the last wave of games, and it just wasn't. Which sucks, because it would have been great for people to be able to experience this awesome multiplayer beat-em-up game, and it's just not a part of the official release. As with all of these games that are not included with the Sega Genesis Mini, of course it will be eventually hackable. All of these systems are. It's just a fact of not including it with the console and forcing people to hack them to get the games on it that they want. Kinda sucks. This would have been really cool to see this game in action in an official release. But unfortunately, because of most likely licensing issues, they were not able to get Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles officially on the Sega Genesis Classic. Next up from the missing list of games that I wish this thing had, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat. None of those games are included on the Sega Genesis Mini. Now, not the biggest deal because you can play these games basically anywhere. They've been ported to death on so many different platforms, but still, would have been nice to have this game included in the official release of Sega Genesis Mini games. And finally, I can't talk about this list without talking about my favorite Sega Genesis game ever, and that is Phantasy Star 2. They did include Phantasy Star 4, which most people say is a superior version. My memories in childhood are with Phantasy Star 2, and while yes, I am playing through Phantasy Star 4 right now and loving it, I still hold a special place in my heart for Phantasy Star 2. And this game has been included in a lot of Genesis collections leading up to this point, so most people have had the ability to play it if they wanted to. It just sucks that they're missing it from the official Sega Genesis Mini release. This one kind of stung because it's such a great game and I want as many people as possible playing it. It is a hardcore old school RPG where it does not take any prisoners and it will beat you down and make you cry. The way it makes it so hard to get through some of the nonsensical puzzle dungeons that it has. But still, Phantasy Star 2 missing from this kind of sucks. Overall, I'm very excited about the Sega Genesis Mini, though I don't want to say these missing games make it such a drawback that it's not worth picking it up. I mean, honestly, looking at this thing, it's going for $79.99. I'll put a link in the description below for a pre-order that I'll make a little bit of money off of if you guys use my link, which I'd appreciate. But ultimately, all of these games here, it's worth it. I'm going to get it still. Yes, I would have loved to see a few of the other games, and Sonic 3 missing is probably the biggest gaping hole in this thing, but outside of that, this thing has got a lot of things going for it. I am pumped to get my hands on the Sega Genesis Mini when it finally releases on September 19th, 2019. That is where we stand with this release. This article is on smashjt.com. I will put a link in the description for this as well. Make sure you hit up smashjt.com, become a member, and contribute to the forums over there. As far as your thoughts on the Sega Genesis Mini, let me know what game you are most excited about, and if this is something you still want to be picking up, or if one of those missing games that's not on this list is making you rethink that purchase. And if there's a game that I didn't talk about that you really wish was on this, let me know in the comments which one you were hoping for. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, you stay smashing.
Smash,